What's good with y'all boys, man? Today is day 100 of reading 30 minutes every single day for the rest of my life. The goal is day 1,000. We are in the woods reading. Top comment with the most likes picks the next book I read. Yeah. I am at page 156 of Carrying the Fire by Michael Collins. I have 30 minutes on the clock, starting now. Let's go. Day 100. Day 100. Spin with the doves. It also made good... Oh, my page flipped over because the wind. It also made good sense from a psychological point of view to have one 8-hour period and 24-hour devoted to rest. Because of that course is that we are accustomed to here on Earth. Our eternal body clocks follow this biological activity, a rest-sleep cycle known as the circadian rhythm. This 24-hour rhythm is keyed to the Earth's rotational period and causes us to become sleepy after dark hours and awaken the next day. It takes roughly a week to change it, so that if we fly from Washington to Tokyo, we arrive to find ourselves wide and awake at night and drowsy in the daytime. But what happens in orbit when we go around the Earth once each 90 minutes, covering the solar day and night in this period of time? Well, the body ignores this fact and clings to its established 24-hour circadian rhythm, so that when it is night back home, Cape Kennedy, since that is where the crew has been living for more than a week prior to the flight, the crew becomes drowsy, even though it may be rapidly changing from dawn to noon to dusk in orbit. Hence, we keep our watches on Cape local time and try to plan orbital activities accordingly. On later flights, we changed our watches to Houston's local time for simplicity's sake and talking to people in mission control. Since Houston and Cape are only an hour apart, it didn't matter much. In addition to our wristwatches and 2 conventional clocks on the instrument panel, the Gemini had a digital elapsed timer, which started counting a liftoff and continued throughout the flight. It measured GET, ground elapsed time as we call it, and it meshed with our flight plan, which recorded major and minor events in terms of hours and minutes after liftoff. The flight plan for Gemini 7 was fairly straightforward, because there was no rendezvous involved and only one vehicle sailing through the sky. Timing was not particularly critical. On the rendezvous flights, split-second timing was required for the various maneuvers, designing to bring Gemini and Agena, its target vehicle, to the same spot at the same time and as the same velocity. On Gemini 7, the main things we had to practice were launch, re-entry, how to conduct the various experiments, and emergency procedures. Emergency procedure drills are a never-ending part of any pilot's training. They have to be reviewed periodically, no matter how experienced the pilot may be in his machine, and kept fresh enough in his mind so that he can react quickly and accurately, no matter what the circumstances. Shit, I just want to make sure there's no one out here, y'all. I'm a little scared. Fuck. Holy shit, y'all. Oh my god. Okay, I'll be safe. In my own case, the value of this kind of practice has been dramatically demonstrated one pleasant sunny day near Chaumont, France, way back in the summer of 1956. Is everything looking good, y'all? Just want to make sure. You feel me? Okay. In my own case, the value of this kind of practice has been dramatically demonstrated one pleasant sunny day near Chaumont, France, way back in the summer of 1956. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was flying my F-86 on a NATO exercise, low over the woods and farmland near Chaumont, looking for friendly troops below. Okay, I'm good. Friendly troops below. If I found any friendliness as indicated by prearranged signals, I was to relay their whereabouts to a group of helicopters waiting nearby, who would airlift them out of the behind enemy lines. Suddenly I felt a sharp thump, and a cockpit began to fill up with light gray smoke. I called to my wingman, Second Lieutenant Charles E. Sexton, to come back, look at me at a close range, and at the same time began a gentle climb back toward the nearby base at Chaumont. By the time Sexy got a beam of me, the smoke was getting so thick that I was having trouble seeing the instruments. But I could still see that the fire warning lights had not come on. The F-86 had 2 fire lights, a forward and an aft, and the forward one is especially bad news, as the machine has been known to blow sky high a second or two after it has come on. I checked both bulbs by a push-to-test circuit, and they both passed. Fortunately, Sexy had now had by now spotted a raging fire just aft of the cockpit and started yelling over the air. "You're on fire! Get out! Get out!" As quickly as I could, I doubled over and actuated the canopy jettison mechanism. If you didn't bend over, the canopy hit you in the head as it departed, then sat erect and ran through the steps necessary to fire the explosive charge beneath my seat, which shot the seat along the rails with me in it. I had no sensation no sensation of motion. One instant I was inside the cockpit, and the next I was tumbling over in a fierce wind blast. My helmet flew off. I reached down and unbuckled my seat, kicked free of the tumbling seat, and immediately yanked the D-ring mounted on the left side of my chest. For what seemed like a long time, nothing happened. Then there was an almighty jerk, and I was swaying back and forth under an orange and white canopy, looking up. Damn. I discovered to my horror that the canopy was shot through the small holes. Were they getting bigger? Bigger? My attention was so focused on measuring hole diameters that I let go of the D-ring. A good luck souvenir, and didn't even notice the ground rushing up at me. Finally, at the last instant, I made a vain attempt to assume the proper position, hit it like a sack of cement, and tumble over the backward into the soft plowed dirt of a farmer's field. Damn. I staggered up, gathered my parachute in my arms, and looked around in vain for my helmet and D-ring. Sexy had called the waiting helicopters, and before anyone on the ground appeared, I was whisked on board one and deposited in the courtyard of the Chalmont AFB hospital a few miles away, as it was a prescribed ritual to have a physical exam after an injection. I waved at the helicopter pilot. He waved at me. He zoomed off, and I tried the hospital door. Locked. A small clinic on a small American base on a weekend, but someone should be around. Finally, on the other side of the building, I found an unlocked door, a darkened corridor of two, and finally one lighted office. There, I politely inquired about seeing a doctor, but the orderly on duty seemed quite agitated and kept shouting, "No doctor, big crash, and doctor's out looking. When? Just now, big crash, but that's me. No big crash." Finally, I convinced the young man, but it really didn't matter, as only the errant physician could sign the necessary papers, and he was not caroming out of the countryside in a truck converted into a four-wheel drive ambulance, looking for bodies at the crash site. By the time he returned, hours later, at least I had filled out all the necessary forms. He examined me and dully noted on his report, "Patient had had inadequate sleep and nutrition for 2 days prior to the accident. He is on no medication and denies ingestion of drugs and excess alcohol. Last physical exam, October 55. Year 55. It's so peaceful being out here, y'all. Damn. I gotta get out here more. It's just crazy to think about. For the last 150,000 years, we were just out here. Like, it just feels so familiar, you know, like kind of home, because we always lived out. Most of the time of humanity, we've just lived out here in the forest. It's truly fascinating, mate. It really is. Okay. My home base sent a T-33 to pick me up, and it wasn't more than a couple of hours before I was ensconced to the Chambly Officers Club bar, ingesting excess alcohol and relieving the experiment before a small but select audience, including my best girl Pat Finnegan. I was relieved to find out that the F-86 had crashed into a forest, injuring no one, and my worst complaint was a skinned knee. Although I have been tempted to blame spinal disc problems in later years on the tremendous compressive G-forces, eyeballs down, experienced during this injection. I learned that the small holes in the parachute canopy were fairly routine and were caused by the heat of friction during deployment, which actually melted the nylon. I later found out that the fire was caused by radio gears igniting a pool of leaking fuel. More important than these things, however, were a couple of other lessons I learned. First, and most reassuring, was that I had reacted as I had practiced. I had done a lot of things right, such as waiting long enough to gain sufficient ejection altitude, but not long enough to risk an explosion. My memorized procedures had been clear in my mind when I needed them, and I followed them swiftly and accurately. In short, I gained a lot of confidence in my own ability to practice emergency procedures and use them if necessary. Good job, Michael. Good job. I'm happy you know how to fly a plane. Oh my gosh. Okay. In the F-86 days, we had no simulator, but simply practiced in the classroom by imagining the necessary switches and motions. Or else we went out onto the flight line or into the hangar and got cockpit time, memorizing each switch position and function. The most important ones we learned to locate blindfolded. Shit, I'm just trying to make sure no one's fucking about to kill me. Most important ones we learned were to locate blindfolded. Oh my god, blindfolded, damn. In Gemini days, we would have scoffed at such crudity. The simulators were exact replicas of the spacecraft cockpit, and the various dials, gauges, and switches were hooked to a computer which caused them to give realistic readings in proper response to the pilot's switch changes or stick movement. Gemini 7 was a good flight for my initiation to the simulator, for with no rendezvous to practice, I could concentrate instead of the basic machine in its normal and emergency procedures. As time went by, and I came to learn the Gemini machinery, I fell in love with Gemini 7. I really wanted to fly that flight, and was half convinced right to the launch day that one of the prime crew would be taken ill, and that Ed and I would make the flight. Mind you, I didn't wish Frank or Jim any bad luck. I was simply preparing myself for a possibility I felt was not too remote. In retrospect, I can't imagine why I wanted to be locked up for 14 days in an orbiting men's room, with no rendezvous or EVA, instead of waiting contentedly to be assigned to one of the later, shorter, more exciting Gemini flights. Just as August 16th, 1956 was the day F-86F 52-5244 had chosen to catch fire, so was October 25th, 1965, the day for Agena 5002, Gemini 6's assigned target vehicle to blow sky high. The Gemini 6 crew watched the Agena's flawless launch atop on a Atlas booster, then busied themselves with preparation for their own launch. But 6 minutes later came the awful news. No sooner had the Agena's main engine, or PPS, primary propulsion system, ignited, than telemetry suddenly ceased and the Cape radars began tracking 5 or 6 targets instead of 1. Apparently, the PPS had gotten a hard start and caused the whole thing to blow. The Gemini 6 crew, Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford, had been eager to make the first space rendezvous and docking, but with no target vehicle, they were all dressed up with no place to go. Some quick planning was done, and Gemini 7 was pressed into service as a target vehicle for Gemini 6. Of course, no actual docking or touching of the two vehicles could take place, but since rendezvous was much more of the complex part of Gemini 6's mission, it was decided to press on and get some rendezvous data by using Gemini 7 as a target rather than waiting for another Agena. It didn't change Gemini 7's plans much. It simply made us change places with Gemini 6, which would follow us from the same launch pad as soon as the ground crews could repair pad damage and erect Gemini 6 in our place. It looked as if we might get both vehicles airborne with a 10-day interval between before and the end of 1965. Gemini 6 was to be as short as 7 was long. Borman was determined to stay up 14 days. Schirra was determined to get the rendezvous done and land as soon as possible. Tom Stafford wanted to go EVA, but Wally would have none of it. Scientists pleaded for experiments to be carried, but Wally just laughed. He wanted simplicity, brevity, and success. The last would follow surely on the heels of the first two. He had the world's greatest human computers, Tom Stafford, to analyze the rendezvous problem, and once that was over, Wally was going to put the Beat Army sign in the window, play a few bars of Jingle Bells on his harmonica for the benefit of Frank and Jim, and then come home and have a cigarette. This guy's funny. Corned beef. John Young would have gone skinned alive for such pure corn, but Wally somehow carried it off with elan. As the great day approached for Gemini 7, Sorry, the squirrel's up there, y'all. I'm chilling. As the great day approached for Gemini 7, December 4th, I reluctantly concluded that Jim Lovell was really going to make the flight after all. So like a good backup crew member, I did everything I could to be helpful, right down to setting up his switches and getting his side of the cockpit reshaped prior to the launch. I even had a tiny sampler embroidered, which he could stick on his instrument panel if he wanted. Home sweet home, it said. And for 2 weeks it would in fact be home, sweet or not. Noon on the 4th of December found Ed White and me dressed in white smocks and white caps, standing around the White Room. The enclosed system of portable platforms built around the upper end of the Titan II rocket that served as a loading dock, communication center, and the only access into the Gemini. When Jim and Frank appeared, we couldn't say a word to them, as they were sealed inside their pressure suits, denitrogenating in 100% pure oxygen. 100% oxygen, not pure. But there was much hopping around. Little visual jokes were made. Everybody clapped. Everybody else was on the back. And then we loaded them on the board, pushing them far enough down on the seats so that the hatches could close freely without bumping their heads. As soon as Jim's shoulders harness, seatbelt, oxygen hoses, and communication wires were secured, there was time for one last handshake. Then the hatch was latched behind him, and I retreated to the gantry with the others, and the White Room was dismantled. With nothing else to do, feeling completely useless, all of a sudden, Ed White and I retreated to a safe vantage point. Wooded bleachers located outside the launch control center a couple of miles away. As the 2:30 p.m. liftoff time approached, I felt increasingly nervous. If at last Agena could blow sky high, why not a Gemini Titan? The fact that one had ever almost made it worse, as there was always a first time for everything. And did not the flawless launches of Gemini 1 through 5 mean poorer, not better odds for that to come after? Such logic or lack of it is prevalent at launch time. On the months of calm, dispassionate analyses give way to a few minutes of emotion and an outburst of hope and horror as the inert beast comes alive for the first time. Shakes itself, and its newfound tail on fire, and starts slowly to move. For the first few seconds, it is purely a spectacle, for what the eyes alone involved, one can see but not succumb. But when the great crackling Mach 1 roar arrives and the very ground under shakes, then you are there, you are part of it, and you laugh or cry or yell or whisper. For 6 months I had consumed Gemini 7, and now it was consuming me. It was going without me, or at least with only a part of me, or at least it appeared to be going, and it was getting help from the crowd. Go, 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 they cried rhythmically. Go, go, I whispered out of the phrase and with a lump in my throat. Please go. And ever more swiftly it did, until it finally was but a dot in the sky, and then gone altogether. Whereupon everyone congratulated his neighbor and said, well, that's over, but of course for the crew it was just the beginning. Oh God, just for the crew, just be the beginning, because they're going out into space and leaving everyone behind. And technically they experience a little bit of time dilation as well, and it's awesome though. Seriously, it's awesome. Ed and I flew back to Houston and visited the Mission Control Center. The backup crewmen were celebrities of a short around MCC during the time of their flight is up, and are called upon for advice, especially if things go wrong. As they know the machine intimately, however, they usually have no regularly assigned duties, as the astronaut office is represented in MCC by the Capcoms, who generally work around the clock in 3 shifts and who do all the talking to the spacecraft. Since Gemini 7 was not going well, there wasn't really a hell of a lot for me to do, and I got into a daily routine of briefing Susan Borman and Marilyn LaVille on the process of the flight. Susan, in particular, showed determined interest in the flight plan, and I would update it daily for her and show her on the map what part of the globe she could expect Frank to be over at one time. As the wearing days went by, this little ritual grew more and more strained. I think naturally enough, all Susan really wanted to ask was whether Frank was going to make it home again. None of us knew the answer to that, which Susan also knew, so she didn't ask the question. 8 days into the flight of Gemini 7, Gemini 6 was all ready to join, and Launch Complex 19 at the Cape again had Gemini Titan poised for launch. Wally Shearer and Tom Stafford had no Agena to worry about this time, and all appeared normal during the countdown. In fact, they got engine ignition and an indication of liftoff, then a sudden silence. They had about a second to review 2 scenarios. Damn, I gotta iron my shirt, y'all. This shit's crazy, bro. Oh, we doing this to get better. We doing this to read better. We're doing this to talk better. To love better. To think better. You feel me? It's just crazy, y'all. 1,000 days, that's 2 years, y'all. That's 2 fucking years, boys. Oh my God. But I'm happy y'all boys are with me right now, and we really doing this, and we trekking along. Remember, subscribe and like, please. Turn the noties on so you can see me reach day 1,000, y'all. I really want y'all to be there for it. This is an act of love and discipline, and having time for myself. I feel like this is a good ritual. You know what I mean? This is a good illusion. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading. In fact, they got the engine ignition and an indication of liftoff, then a sudden silence. They had about a second to review 2 scenarios. 1. The engines, for some reason, had shut down after liftoff, and they were now on the brink of disaster and would either settle back down to topple over requiring immediate ejection to avoid the ensuing Holocaust. 2. Now, let me reread that. 2 scenarios. The engines, for some reason, had shut down after liftoff, and they were now on the brink of disaster and would either settle back down to topple over, requiring immediate ejection to avoid the ensuing Holocaust. 2. The engines had shut down the instant before liftoff, in which that case they were still firmly bolted to the launch pad and could stay put unless some new danger developed. The design of the hardware spoke for option 1. A hangover from the Mercury days when spacecrafts were called capsules, and those who communicated with them, therefore capsule commutators. Supposedly, the liftoff signal of the cockpit was foolproof, but the seat of Wally's pants spoke for 2. It felt solid under him. A panicky type might have ejected anyway, and had Wallen and Tom done so, certainly no one familiar with the hardware would have blamed them. But super cool Wally kept his head, picked up the correct option. Gemini 6 was saved to fly another day. It turned out that an electrical plug had vibrated loose after engine ignition, but a split second before liftoff, causing a spurious shutdown signal to be sent to the Titan's engines. The following day, it was announced that a plastic dust cover carelessly left in a fuel line would have blocked the Gemini 6 launch, even if an electrical plug had not dropped out of the tail and shut down the Titan II's engines. The device apparently had been installed at the plant and was not removed due to human error. Wally and Tom must have been living right. The third launch attempt on December 15th, 1965 was finally successful, and after a 4-orbit chase, as planned, Gemini 6 was pulled up alongside Gemini 7 and flew in formation with it for 5 hours. During which the 2-time crews chatted and took pictures of each other. Then it was time for Wally and Tom to separate, grab some sleep, play Jingle Bells, and re-enter, leaving Frank and Jim to plod along for another couple of days. Finally, December 18th came, and it was Frank's turn to assume the retrofire altitude and prepare the electrical circuitry, which would enable the 4 solid retro rocket motors to fire. That is, if they would. If they hadn't become too cold-soaked or otherwise damaged by over 300 hours of exposure to the vacuum of space. That's a cool bird. Y'all hear that? Yeah, that's a cool bird. Firing the retro rockets was the only way to get Gemini 7 down before it ran out of oxygen. Hold on, someone text me. Okay. Firing the retro rockets was the only way to get Gemini 7 down before it ran out of oxygen. So all of us in MCC breathed this great sigh of relief as Frank reported a successful retrofire. Now we had a shorter list of worries. Would they come down in the right place? Would the parachute open? Would they be in good physical shape? It wasn't long before our TV screen showed the two stepping out. Yes, they could walk. Onto the carrier deck. They looked pale, tired, and unshaven, but happy, smiling, and not in any obvious physical distress. Yeah. What am I doing? Just trying to fix my clothes. Now we had a shorter list of worries. Post-flight physical results confirmed that the fact that they were in good shape, in some ways less the wear for their 14 days than Cooper and Conrad had been after 8. Borman had lost 10 pounds and Lavelle 6. Damn. Lavelle's pulsating thigh cuffs had no detectable effect. Borman's brain waves had shown that he slept fitfully for a couple of hours the first night, and well for 7 hours the second night, which Borman had long since reported himself. The third night was not recorded, since the EEG scalp electrodes had been prematurely jerked loose. Whether accidentally or on purpose, only Borman knew. Damn. He didn't want them knowing if he was sleeping or not. The crew's tolerance for exercise, as measured by their heart's response to pulling on the bungee cord, had not changed appreciably over the 14 days. The bone density x-rays were a pleasant surprise, since a loss of 3% roughly was noted, only one-third that of the Gemini 5 crew. The results of the intricate calcium balance studies I have never seen, nor do I have any burning desire to search archives for them. Nor can I report how long it took the automatic nervous system to relearn its leg flapper valve duties. But one has only to remember the televised view of Borman and Lavelle's confident walk across the carrier deck to realize no serious problems existed. The two main factors which explained why the Gemini 7 crew fared so well compared to 5 are that 7 had less bulky pressure suits and were allowed to remove them for the most of the flight, and that 7 employed the most restful routine of simultaneous sleep periods. I think a third reason was Frank Borman's disciplined determination. God damn it. His flapper valves would too close, and Lavelle's had better too. Otherwise, court-martial them. With both Gemini 6 and 7 on the ground, 5 of the Gemini program's 10 manned flights were completed, and more than half of the Gemini's questions had been answered. The two main ones were man's durability for the weightless lunar voyage and the practicality of a lunar strategy which required a space rendezvous for its successful completion. True, an actual docking had not taken place, and despite Ed White's 20-minute foray, there was no solid data to prove man could operate effectively outside his spacecraft, but these were considered to be fairly minor problems. The single big unknown remaining was the whole rendezvous question. Rendezvous is an incredible, complicated game with more variables than one likes to list. Just because Wally and Tom had done it once in Earth orbit under carefully controlled conditions did not mean it could be done in lunar orbit with the pre-mutations and combinations of lighting, timing, and spacing, not to mention all the possible equipment breakdowns. Degraded modes, they were called, which might still make rendezvous possible, but which would require the use of different techniques. Hence, the remaining 5 Gemini flights were not all to feature rendezvous, docking, and EVA, with as many variations of the rendezvous theme as could be squeezed into 5 Earth orbital flights. The next flight up, Gemini 8, belonged to Neil Armstrong and Dave Scott, which meant that Dave would be the first 14 to fly, despite the fact that I had been the first to be assigned to crew duty. Dave, on 8 and Charlie Bassett on 9 had sneaked in ahead of me, bypassing the backup crew apprenticeship, a fact which rightfully put me in my place. When the 8 crew... Damn, was Neil Armstrong like a god? Was Neil Armstrong a god? When the 8 crew had been announced in September and the 9th crew in November, I had been happy for them, and I felt that this was further proof that NASA was in good outfit and knew what it was doing. But now, as 1966 began, I was getting a bit nervous. For 6 months I had figured that Gemini 10 would be mine, but now Ed White told me it wasn't going to be his, that he had the word from DEC that he was moving on to Apollo. He was Wow. That was day 100 of reading 30 minutes every single day for the rest of my life, y'all. Holy fucking shit! Let's fucking go! I am beyond fucking happy. I am so happy. Y'all have been with me. The people who have been watching my videos, thank you so much. I appreciate y'all so much. Again, top comment of this video with the most likes decides the next book I read. I will go and buy that book. Yes, sir. I am at the middle of page 166. That was day 100 of reading for 30 minutes every single day for the rest of my life. Wow. Today, 1,000. Today, 1,000. That's going to take so long, but we're going to do it. Please like and sub. I want to see y'all there with me. If not, that's fine. I just want to read. I'm enjoying myself. This is amazing. And yeah, see y'all day 101. Peace.